Are national teams in Europe actually national? Today, in continental Europe, some are afraid to even ask this question out loud. It's as if simply bringing it up is a taboo, or even a crime. Others argue that we're facing a genuine existential crisis, insisting that the national jersey should only be worn by true sons of the soil, those whose roots go back generations. This debate isn't just happening in sports bars anymore. It has spilled out of the stadium stands and into parliament floors, campaign promises, and state funded public opinion polls. There is a clear collision here. On one side, you have a modern state model that keeps its borders open, viewing citizenship as nothing more than a legal bond on paper. According to this view, as long as you hold the passport and sing the anthem, you're just as national as anyone else. Across the aisle, however, there is a much sharper block that puts culture, historical belonging, and, most importantly, skin color at the center of the map. For them, citizenship is just a piece of paper. The real issue is blood, its lineage. It's a claim to demographic belonging that stretches back centuries, from France to Germany, Italy to Belgium. Every European nation trying to relive its imperial glory on the pitch is struggling with this same question. France has Le Pen, Germany has the AFD, Italy has the Lega, and Belgium has the Vlaams Bloc. Every one of them has its own rising right-wing movement and its own debate over what a true patriot looks like. What you see on your screen today isn't just some tournament. It's the story of an entire continent grappling with its own identity, a confrontation that isn't over, and one with a massive price tag. Welcome to Frame. If you're ready to dig into this journey and uncover the truth, hit subscribe and join us here at Frame. Let's get into it. Mid-20th century, Europe is a wreck. Cities are piles of rubble, factories are silent. The continent's youth died in the trenches. To rebuild, Europe needed something urgent and vital: cheap, plentiful labor. They couldn't rebuild their cities alone. The solution was simple. They turned their eyes toward their former colonies and cross-border migration routes. Germany formalized this with an industrial mindset. It was 1961. The Gastarbeiter, guest workers. The term guest perfectly captured the system's arrogance at the time. The state's plan was crystal clear. These people would come, handle the hardest jobs, work the mines, rebuild the cities, and when the job was done, they'd quietly head home. They were supposed to come, work, and leave. They didn't leave. They stayed. They put down roots. France's equation was far bloodier and darker. It was shipping millions of workers from Algeria, Senegal, and other African colonies to its mines, construction sites, and factories. At the same time, it was waging a brutal war of independence right there in Algeria. While the French army was shedding blood on Algerian streets, the French economy was desperate for the sweat of those very same Algerians. This deadly contradiction was the first fuse lit under the foundations of the Republic. Those black and brown hands that built the French metropolises were never seen by the system as equal citizens. Across the English Channel, another fiasco was unfolding. Post-war Britain called in tens of thousands of workers from the Caribbean, known as the Windrush generation. On paper, they were legal citizens of the British Empire. They arrived in London full of hope. But in the freezing streets of the capital, they were never welcomed with the warmth of a citizen. They ran the hospitals, drove the buses, and kept the infrastructure alive. They became the cheap labor filling the bottom rungs of the system. They rebuilt Britain. The reward? Decades later, the same British state tried to label them as illegal immigrants and deport them. The Windrush scandal, the empire's most brutal betrayal of its own builders, the earliest, most visionary example of exploiting talent and bodies, was on the far west of the continent, Portugal, 1946, 15 years before other European nations signed their labor deals. Portugal discovered a resource in its colonies, Angola and Mozambique, even more valuable than minerals: soccer talent. The athletic potential of Africa began to be officially tapped. This wasn't an integration or equality project. It was a natural extension of colonial rule, a new kind of looting, this time using human bodies. When Mozambique-born Eusébio led Portugal to third place in the 1966 World Cup, no one thought it was a miracle of integration. He was simply the brightest gear in the colonial machine, put on display. The natives of Europe didn't create the post-war miracle. Turks ran the German factories, Algerians the French roads, Caribbeans the British hospitals, and Moroccans and Congolese the Belgian mines. Portugal's soccer fields were filled with African players decades ago. The magnificent national squads you see on TV today are at the very center of this historical boomerang. The grandchildren of those workers brought in half a century ago to turn the gears of Europe have now stepped onto the biggest global stage of the countries their grandfathers built brick by brick. Europe refused to face the new demographic reality it had created. The old continent was trying to vomit out these foreign elements it had absorbed. The new generation of immigrant descent wearing that sacred national jersey wasn't accepted quietly. Massive political and social clashes erupted across Europe. Streets got tense. Stadiums reached a breaking point. In England, this crisis played out in its most raw, unfiltered form right in the stadium stands. The 1980s. John Barnes steps onto the pitch in an England jersey. A black player. He's singing the national anthem, and his own fans are raining bananas down on him. This unbelievable hostility wasn't just some random act by a few hooligans. It was organized. It was systematic. The far-right National Front had consciously turned stadium areas into recruitment grounds for militants. The stands were radicalizing. Newcastle star Kevin Keegan saw these militants handing out flyers outside the club. His ultimatum to management was historic and firm. Get them out or I leave. Soccer wasn't just a sport anymore. It was the most visible stage for street politics, racism, and exclusion. Athletic talent on the pitch wasn't enough to silence the organized hatred in the stands. In France, the tension moved beyond the streets. It climbed straight to the top of parliament and the media. 1996. Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of the far-right Front National, put the French national team in his crosshairs. He stood before the cameras and declared a political war. These players don't represent France. Most of them don't even know or sing the national anthem. This wasn't a random outburst. It was the most effective strategy the far-right had cooked up to broaden its voter base. The soccer pitch and the national squad became the perfect showcase for the party to push its true and pure French identity rhetoric to millions. The message from the system echoed the same way across Europe. The jersey might be national, the state might have handed them a legal passport on paper, but the bodies inside that jersey and the origins of those bodies weren't yet accepted as a real part of society. Every time the players stepped onto the pitch, they weren't just fighting their opponents. They were fighting the prejudices of the very society that jersey belonged to. This dark tension lingered over European soccer like a heavy cloud until the very end of the 90s. In the summer of 1998, the wind shifted. The toxic, dark atmosphere that had blanketed the 90s gave way to one of the greatest social celebrations in history. The World Cup, hosted by France, made all the racism and identity clashes on the streets disappear in a single night. The final whistle blew. France hoisted the trophy. Paris saw a scene unlike any military or political victory before it. Millions of people, practically in a trance, poured into the Champs-Élysées, drunk on victory. That night, the origins, beliefs, or skin color of the people singing in the streets didn't matter for a single second. On screen, there was a pure French victory. Black-Blanc-Beur, black, white, and Arab. A perfect picture of brotherhood where three different origins celebrated shoulder to shoulder under a single flag. The streets were vibrating to a single rhythm, to a newly invented multicultural anthem. The social anger of the years past gave way to a staged hysteria. At the heart of this grand narrative stood one man, Zinedine Zidane. The son of an Algerian immigrant family who grew up in the poor suburbs of Marseille, he carried France to the top of the world with the headers he scored in the final. Yet, Zidane's father was just one of millions of anonymous workers who came to France from Algeria during the colonial era to work on construction sites. Lives spent in mud and mortar, invisible bodies. That night, the son of the anonymous worker was no longer just a midfielder. He was the greatest national symbol of the entire republic. A massive portrait of Zidane was projected onto the Eiffel Tower, the most iconic structure in France. The state's message to the whole world was crystal clear. The face of the new France was the son of a Muslim immigrant. History was trying to absolve itself by putting the children of the colonized on display. The 1998 victory was the perfect life raft for politicians and the media. The same immigrant background squad that the far right had been trashing just a short while ago for not singing the anthem became untouchable national heroes overnight. Newspapers ran headlines championing Zidane as the living proof of Republican equality. The message beamed to society through television screens was this: no matter your origins, you can reach the very top in this land with talent and hard work. The political establishment marketed the cup as a massive victory for integration. The bleeding wounds of a half-century of colonial history were swept under the rug in an instant. A single gold trophy was presented as if it had permanently solved the deep identity crisis of millions. The celebrations in the streets turned into a giant theatrical stage set up for the state to seek absolution. Millions were convinced by this performance. That was the story they wanted us to believe. What really happened was one of the most dangerous political illusions in European history. The symbolic mission loaded onto Zinedine Zidane's shoulders was the classic way of marketing the sporting success of a few individuals as the solution to an entire sociological crisis. It was all staged from start to finish, a fake brotherhood fairy tale believed by millions, celebrated with songs in the streets, and skillfully whipped up by the state's elite. Like every illusion, its lifespan was bound to be short. The shelf life of this perfect lie was only 4 years. 2002 World Cup. That invincible armada, that new France image of multiculturalism, hit a wall in the stadiums of South Korea. France was eliminated in the group stage without scoring a single goal, in a historic and shameful debacle. The moment that final whistle blew, the fake integration mask that had been worn for 4 years shattered into pieces in seconds. The anthems on the streets went silent. The lights on the Eiffel Tower went out. The system's secret contract was ruthlessly triggered. Those untouchable national heroes, carried on shoulders just 4 years prior, turned back into problematic immigrants in the eyes of society the moment the scoreboard turned against them. The reversal exposed the poisonous double standard at the heart of the issue. The system only accepted an immigrant background citizen into the center as long as they provided a flawless benefit, as long as they won. It was conditional love, a belonging contract hanging by a thread. You didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. When you scored, you were French. When you missed a penalty or got eliminated from the tournament, you were Arab or African. The thin line between the two identities depended entirely on the scoreboard. The 2002 disaster was about much more than a soccer team crashing. It was the official declaration of how pragmatic, fake, and fragile Europe's relationship with its immigrants really was. The tournament ended. Celebrations gave way to a deep silence. The suburbs were left alone again with their alienation. The silence lasted only 3 years. Autumn 2005. The Paris suburbs were burning. The integration fairy tale stepped out of those sterile TV studios and collapsed physically on the cold concrete of the streets. The deaths of 2 immigrant teenagers while running from police triggered a massive social rage that had been building for decades. Weeks of riots broke out. Tens of thousands of cars burned. Government buildings, schools, and gyms set on fire. The streets turned into a war zone. The sounds of sirens and shattering glass completely drowned out the fake multicultural victory anthems of 1998. The Black-Blanc-Beur Brotherhood gave way in an instant to police shields, rubber bullets, and clouds of tear gas. The state and the immigrants were no longer facing off on the pitch, but at burning barricades. On the darkest night of the crisis, a single sentence from the very top of the state shattered the last remaining humanist mask. Then, Interior Minister Nicolas Sarkozy went straight before the cameras. While saying he would clean the burning suburbs with water cannons, he used that historic word, racaille, scum, trash. Who were those angry youths that Sarkozy was labeling scum and sending the police after? They were the very same little kids who, just 7 years earlier, were cheering with French flags in their hands on the Champs-Élysées when Zidane lifted the trophy in the 1998 World Cup final. Time passed. Those hopeful kids grew up. They were pushed completely outside the system. They dropped out of education. They were locked out of employment. And in the end, they were labeled trash by the very state they had cheered for. The contract was unilaterally torn up. The 2005 riots were the most brutal, direct confrontation of Europe facing the sociological wreckage it had created with its own hands. The soccer pitch was a giant illusion machine numbing the masses. The suburbs were the cold, bloody reality. The scoreboard could only save 90 minutes. The lies lasted 4 years. The streets kept bleeding and burning. Beneath the collapse on the pitch lies a much deeper, much harsher question that never makes it to the scoreboard. Why are those second and third generation immigrant kids growing up in the suburbs gravitating so heavily towards soccer, boxing, or music? The answer isn't a natural knack for talent. It's hidden in a much colder, calculated, and brutal social exclusion. The social ladder doesn't work the same way in immigrant neighborhoods as it does for everyone else. Equal opportunity in education is a constitutional fairy tale. It only exists on paper. In reality, suburban schools always get the fewest resources and the least experienced teachers. Kids start the race at the bottom 10 steps behind. Even those rare youths who beat all these odds and make it to university hit invisible walls in the business world after graduating. In interview rooms, it isn't their diplomas or talent that are judged, but their origins. They are quietly turned away from those shiny doors because of a letter in their name or a zip code in their address. Official research in France hits the truth right in the face. When an Arabic-sounding name is put on an identical perfect CV, the response rate from companies drops by half instantly. Merit doesn't work in the white-collar world. The doors of the system are closed to them. This invisible glass ceiling, as hard as concrete, pushes youths in one direction without them realizing it: the pitch. Soccer is almost the only place where no one asks for your last name, where your grandfather came from, your skin color, or what neighborhood you live in. It's only your performance on the field that talks. It's an authoritarian, clear, and meritocratic exit door. That's why Zinedine Zidane wasn't a perfect integration miracle marketed by the state. He was a very rare exception who managed to pass through that brutal bottleneck where millions of youths are swallowed up. The system presented him as a model. In reality, he wasn't a miracle created by the system, but a survivor who made it despite that system. Another deadly trap awaits those who find the exit door in the middle of the pitch: the sociological guillotine. The love the system offers them is pragmatic. You are accepted as long as you are useful, just like Mesut Özil. After being subjected to a heavy racist smear campaign when they were eliminated early from the 2018 World Cup, he resigned. Following comments by DFB President Reinhard Grindel, the integration debate reached a boiling point. Özil uttered that shocking sentence that went down in history: "I am German when we win, but I am an immigrant when we lose." Mario Balotelli in Italy. The Palermo-born son, adopted by a Ghanaian immigrant family. Throughout his career, he faced "there is no such thing as a black Italian" banners in the stands. When the team was eliminated in the 2014 World Cup, he was accused by some fans of not really being Italian. His rebellion was firm: "Maybe I'm not a real Italian, but Africans would never betray their brothers." Romelu Lukaku in Belgium. The elite forward of Congolese descent was put under the same psychological guillotine. His statement to the press summarized Europe's double standard in a single sentence: "When things go well, I'm Belgian, but when things go badly, I'm a Congolese origin forward." The toxic tension of the past continues today by changing form. Far-right parties aren't sending coded messages anymore. They've kicked down the locker room door. Every country's own far-right is loudly repeating the same discriminatory argument through new names and new stages. Germany, Euro 2024, the host of the tournament. The far-right AfD openly targeted the national team. European Parliament candidate Maximilian Krah branded the squad a mercenary team carrying political correctness. Thuringia state leader Björn Höcke pushed street-level discrimination into the center of politics, declaring, "I can no longer identify with our own national team." The most shocking data came from the streets. A public opinion poll slapped the system's subconscious in the face. 47% of AfD voters stated, without any reservation, that they wanted to see more white players on the team. 17% of respondents said they found it sad that Turkish origin İlkay Gündoğan was wearing the captain's armband. This hate speech wasn't new. Back in 2016, the AfD had used the same discriminatory line for Jerome Boateng, saying he was liked as a soccer player but not wanted as a neighbor. Racism isn't being whispered in stadium areas anymore. It's being spilled into statistics in official poll results. In France, the frontline was drawn through the team's biggest star, Kylian Mbappé. 2024 early general elections. Mbappé stepped in front of the cameras. He directly called on youth to head to the polls against the rise of the far-right Rassemblement National. His sentence was historic: "I hope we can wear this jersey with pride after July 7th. The far-right's response didn't take long. The reaction from the party was a haughty and authoritarian reflex that summarizes the system's view of immigrant kids. "You're a soccer player? Stick to your soccer." Reconquête founder Zemmour's "the team must look like the country" outburst was also a product of the same line. The system's design was working perfectly. Immigrant kids were ordered only to run, sweat, and score goals. They were denied political will and a sense of citizenship. Mbappé crossed the line. He refused to stay away from politics. He didn't accept being a silent machine. An immigrant figure who defends his own rights, produces politics, and directs the masses was a much bigger threat to the nationalist front than lost tournaments. The debate has long since crossed stadium boundaries. It's shed the slogans. It's moved into the cold corridors of law. 2026, the Netherlands. NAC Breda Club started an unprecedented war in the middle of bureaucracy. They filed an official challenge against the citizenship status of players who play for rival teams and hold Dutch passports, but chose other countries' national teams. The case files paralyzed Dutch soccer in an instant. The risk of 133 matches across the country being cancelled or replayed was put on the table. The case, covering 11 players across 8 different clubs, shows the destructive scale the issue has reached. Belonging, bloodline, and loyalty aren't staying in the campaign rallies of far-right parties anymore. They are being dissected in courtrooms, in front of judges, on the desks of bureaucracy. Names change, parties change, the core argument never changes. The jersey might be national. Whether the body wearing that jersey is actually national continues to be ruthlessly judged anew at every ballot box and every courtroom. After all these historical fractures, collapsed illusions, and political debates that have outgrown the stadiums, a massive truth hangs over the very heart of Europe today. The demographic picture we see on the pitches is neither an integration blessing nor a silent invasion as the far right claims. It is pure demographic math. It is the inevitable bill of centuries of imperial ambition and the desire to loot the world, landing right at your doorstep. If you build an empire, the price of conquest isn't just taking resources, it's being trapped in the same shared future with the children of those peoples. Europe is currently locked in the center of a deep contradiction. On one side, they want to close their borders with the rising wave of nationalism and build a pure national identity. On the other, because of their aging populations and global prestige ambitions, they are dependent on the talent, sweat, and strength of the children of those who came through those borders. While continental politics wants to shut the doors, the continent's need for a showcase makes it mandatory to feel the children of those who came through those doors. The truth is never written on the scoreboard. The score on your screen only tells you who won that day. It doesn't tell you about the silent alienation those kids in jerseys leave behind, the dark minds their grandfathers worked in, or the fake brotherhood masks the system forces them to wear. The real match isn't played on the stadium grass, but in the subconscious of society. Europe is at war with its own soul. Stay tuned to Frame, because we will keep talking not just about what happens on the pitch, but about the invisible forces that truly shape the world.